Please welcome ALEC Board Member, Ohio State Senator, President Rob McColley.
Thank you, Lisa, for an informative panel on an emerging issue in our economy. These are the reasons that we come to ALEC. So I come to you from Ohio, the other side of Indiana, to bring you an alternative perspective to what we're hearing about the other neighbor in Illinois, Ohio, where the ALEC principles of limited government, free markets, and federalism are on full display, where ed choice is thriving in the state, where deregulation is something that we're focusing on all the time, and where just recently we enacted a flat tax, 2.75%, which will be the lowest in the Midwest. But our work in Ohio is not done. Our work is just beginning. Just like any other state in this room, when you come to these conferences, there's the healthy competition that happens. There's the realization that our work has been cut out for us by the leaders across the country who are trying to think of that next bold and innovative step. And to take those next steps, we need bold and innovative leaders. We need bold and innovative voices in each of our states and across our country. And our next speaker that we're all going to get a chance to hear from today is one of those bold and innovative leaders. Vivek Ramaswamy has fought cancel culture here in this country and even wrote a book called Woke Inc., Fighting Cancel Culture in this country. He's been a voice for the MAGA movement and for President Trump in this country through his re-election campaign in 2024 and his great political comeback. And indeed, he's a voice for a new generation of leaders across this country. Allow me to introduce my friend, a friend of President Trump, and most importantly for today, a friend of ALEC, Vivek Ramaswamy.
It's good to see you, and I want to congratulate my friend, President of our Senate, Rob McColley, and the entire Ohio delegation for arriving at that flat tax. I'm very proud of what you were able to accomplish this last cycle, and I got to say I was backstage listening to what, leaving this meeting, I will now going forward refer to as the Illinois Doctrine. And what we're aiming to set in Ohio, we're getting there, and in a course of a few years we will be there, is the alternative mirror image of that, what I will call the Ohio Doctrine. What we are able to set as a standard for the future of the United States of America. And I want to applaud the delegations of states from Florida to Tennessee to Texas to Utah to so many others of you who have set great examples and brought great ideas for us of what we're going to turn into reality in our own home state. But I say that in the spirit of where we are in our national history. It's a special moment for the future of the United States of America, where in the next 2 years, perhaps sooner, the center of gravity of saving this country is actually going to move from Washington, D.C. back to the states and to the people where it belongs. It's a founding moment. It's a founding moment in the United States of America. Look at the shutdown of the Department of Education, which is now well underway, and you can give President Trump a round of applause for that one. That is step one. But that is the first step of still leading our country forward. The next step falls on the shoulders of the people in this room to actually revive the educational standards themselves. You see, shutting down the Department of Education is a great first step, but the ultimate finishing of that job falls on the shoulders of the states and the leaders like many of you who are here today. And that's where I want to kick off as we think about refocusing and resetting where we are as a conservative movement today. It's a message that's designed to not necessarily tell you deliver you candy, let me just say, but maybe deliver you some vegetables, deliver all of us some vegetables that I think we need to swallow if we're going to actually play our role in leading our country back to greatness. We defeated the radical woke left. We won in November of 2024, and that is a new reality that we ought to start getting used to, and I mean that in a more challenging sense. It's easy to now lambast the Kamala Harris, Joe Biden administration, or whatever that was for 4 years. I did plenty of it, perhaps so did many of you. But that era is now behind us. And if we're talking about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in 6 months, that means we lost the plot. Frankly, I want our memory of Joe Biden in September of this year to be about the same as Joe Biden's memory of anything while he was in office. Because that's the past. We are now ready to chase our future. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we plan to do in Ohio, but then I want to expand that to a broader discussion of where we have to head as a conservative movement nationally. In our state of Ohio, my goal, our goal as leaders of our state, is to turn Ohio back into the state that we were for most of our national history, the state of excellence in the United States of America. We're a great state, one of the best in our region. Compared to our friends in Illinois and Minnesota, where I visited recently, I can confirm we are one of the best in the Midwest. But I hope, and I mean this with due humility to this group, I hope that we're able to lead Ohio not just to be the top state in the Midwest, but for our part, the top state in the country, to raise a young family, to grow a new business, to celebrate and embrace capitalism with pride, the greatest system known to the history of man to lift people up from poverty. To be the state where we educate and cultivate our young people to see themselves not as victims, but as victors in a competitive global economy. And for Ohio to take back our turn to be a state that people flock to and flock back to, not just to our friends in Texas or Florida. And there are many who question whether Ohio could possibly be that state. How could Ohio be that state, they ask. In fact, our friends in California remind me there's an app on TikTok where there's a little meme. If something's old or out of touch or out of fashion for the last few years, they even say, only in Ohio. And that irritates me because it wasn't long ago that people weren't making fun of Ohio. They were aspiring to be Ohio. We led the first industrial revolution. In 1950, 6 of the top 15 wealthiest cities in America were in our own home state of Ohio. Toledo led the world in glass production, Akron in rubber production, Youngstown and Cleveland in steel production. My hometown of Cincinnati was known around the world as the Queen City, the consumer products capital of the West. And there's something special that happens. This is not just a lesson for Ohio, this is a lesson for the nation. There's something special that happens when a kid is growing up in that state, in that nation, the heart of the greatest nation known to the history of mankind, is that they believe they're able to achieve the things they were taught to believe were impossible. It's not an accident that that was the same Ohio that Neil Armstrong grew up in, born, raised, living in Ohio as he became the first man in human history to walk on the moon. It's not a coincidence that was the Ohio that raised John Glenn, born, raised, living in Ohio when he became the first American to go into orbit around the Earth. The same Ohio that the Wright brothers grew up in, born and raised in Dayton, eventually going on to take flight at a moment they were taught to believe that was impossible. And my goal is to revive that spirit in our state, but to do it in our state for all 50 states in our union, to say we're the state of excellence, we were the place that led the world, and we ought to be the place that does it again. If it was Silicon Valley that led the way in the American economy for the last 10 years, we want it to be the Ohio River Valley for the next 10 years, not through the Rust Belt, but through the Platinum Belt, not just chasing the sectors of the past, but the sectors of the future as well. From semiconductor production to nuclear energy to our defense industrial base, and dare I say, the state and the region where we actually embrace AI, not to take old jobs, but to make new jobs through workforce training and education. It's a modern-day Northwest ordinance for our region. That's the way I see it. It's going to require some changes. We're going to become a zero-income tax state, starting from that base of a flat tax, because you deserve to keep what you earn. It's your money, not the government's. I was with Art Laffer backstage, and he reminded me it wasn't long ago that most states did not have an income tax. It's a recent invention, one of our poorer inventions of mankind, and we're going to get rid of it. One of the first steps to get there, and we'd love to open source our policies, is to take the steps of actually stopping the taxation of capital gains as part of the first step to actually get there, so that we could be a magnet, like iron to a magnet, for capital owners across the country. But perhaps the most important thing we're going to work on in the state of Ohio over the long run, and I think perhaps the most important calling for our nation over the next 20 years, is to lead our country out of the educational achievement crisis that we're in. I want to talk about this for a minute. I think there's two great threats to the future of American exceptionalism, and I believe it's going to fall on the shoulders of its states to address both of these deficits. Number one is the failure in educational achievement. Think about where the hard facts are today. 75% of 8th graders across the country today are not proficient in math. The average student in the United States is a full 4 academic years behind their counterpart in China, 5 full years behind their peers in Singapore. That's unacceptable, especially as we enter an era of AI, automation, enter the era of the future. That doesn't work for the future of the United States of America. And it's not going to be the federal government that fixes it. At most, we're going to see a federal government that does its part by getting out of the business of federal mandates in education through the shutdown of the DOE. But fixing that problem is going to now fall on the shoulders of those of us in this room. And what we hope to do for the country is to set a model for how we not only overcome the woke indoctrination and victimhood psychology, which we must continue to do. I believe the peak of that's behind us, but that job isn't finished until we've actually eradicated a lot of the poison. But to go further than that, to actually ask, how do we then go further and actually elevate our performance in math, reading, writing, physical education, financial literacy, civic education, and you think about even the sectors of the future, even embracing AI competence and literacy beginning in high school. That's the standard we want to set in the state of Ohio. Now, some of this includes combating a chronic absenteeism epidemic that began with the COVID-19 school closures. Our state was not immune from this, and never again are we going to collectively bend the knee to fake Anthony Fauci knockoffs in each of our states that allowed our public schools to be closed while our private schools remained open. But that's just basic. That's just table stakes stuff. When we think about really elevating our public schools to be able to compete with the best of the alternatives, yes, we need school choice to the furthest level that states like Arizona and Iowa have gone. I'm proud of you all for setting a standard that we're going to get to in Ohio as well. But we also have to make sure that our public schools are equipped to compete with the best of those alternatives. And that means we are going to have to adopt new models that actually pay the best teachers according to the outcomes that they actually deliver. See, I'm an entrepreneur, not a politician, I'm a businessman. And it would be unthinkable to run a business in a way that paid everybody according to not their performance, but whether or not they were employed. To say whether or not you get promoted, whether or not you get a bonus, whether or not you get hired or fired, is completely agnostic to your performance in a business. That would be unthinkable. In fact, your business would probably fail if you ran it that way. And yet that is exactly how effectively all 50 states run our public school systems today. And what we aim to do in the state of Ohio, and we would love nothing more than for every other state to replicate and even innovate on what we develop, is merit-based compensation for teachers. Not just teaching to the test. Thank you. We'll take that. Not just teaching to the test, but holistic assessments of performance management. Taking a look at actually peer assessments in the school, parental assessments. Parents often know whether their kids are thriving in the classroom or not. And yes, some measure of student outcomes as well. There's a school in Ohio that's actually done it, a public school in Clyde, Ohio. 10 years ago, night and day differences. When you look at outcomes for graduation rates, retention rates, job placement rates, it's common sense. And yet this is the kind of failure that actually holds our public schools back. To the extent that teachers' unions stand in our way, we have to have the courage to do what's right and ask ourselves, if you're a teacher unionizing against who exactly? It's the very students you're supposed to represent. And so what I've said in Ohio is I'm not running on a campaign to dismantle teachers' unions, but I'm not running on a campaign not to dismantle teachers' unions either. We will do whatever is required to achieve the goal of bringing merit to our public education system. That includes replacing a lot of the victimhood psychology with actual civics lessons, U.S. history lessons, that teach our students to be proud of our state and our country rather than to be ashamed of it. And some of that comes with tough love. Every high school senior who graduates from an Ohio high school, I hope this is true across all 50 states very soon, will have to pass the same civics test that every legal immigrant has to pass before that immigrant becomes a voting citizen. It's not too much to ask of our own high school seniors. You got to know something about your country, to be proud of your country, to pledge allegiance to that country. And that's what I want to see in the country in the moment we're in right now. As conservatives, we're done with the era of just bashing, I would say, beneath par opposition party. That's been too easy. We won. We control all three chambers, all three branches of the government at the federal level. And in our state, the same goes for our state at the state level, too. At this point, if we screw it up, we've got nobody left to blame but ourselves. And we believe in accountability. We will practice what we preach. We want to see that revival of ambition in our country. Economic ambition, educational ambition, academic ambition, scientific ambition. Yes, even moral and spiritual ambition. A country that embraces that spirit of victory over victimhood. We don't whine, we win. That's who we are. That's what we want to see out of the conservative movement. Not imitating the victimhood culture of the left, but breaking free of it to revive that quaint idea of the American dream. That idea that if you work hard, you play by the rules, you do get to have a good life. You do get to dream for an even better life for your kids. I know that American dream exists because I have lived it. Born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, the kid of immigrants who came to this country over 40 years ago with almost nothing. And in a single generation, having gone on to found successful companies, become the youngest person in U.S. history to run for president as a Republican. Now, hopefully, God willing, in a position to lead that very state where I was born and raised. The extraordinary thing about that story is that it is really not that extraordinary in the United States of America. It ought not be extraordinary in states like Ohio. And I want to see us embrace that spirit of ambition that sent Neil Armstrong to the moon, that sent John Glenn into orbit, that sent the Wright brothers to fly those blue skies at a moment they were taught to believe that was impossible, to cultivate a generation of young people who aren't dependent on their government, but independent from it, to challenge those of us in this room, not just to quibble over the small accounting fights of how we manage Medicaid spending one direction or another, but to ask the big question of how do we cultivate an entire generation that is so financially successful, so well educated, so equipped, starting at a young age with the power of financial literacy and the knowledge of compounding, that they're independent from not just Medicaid, but Medicare, Social Security, the federal entitlement state and welfare state, that will likely have run out of money by the time those kids who are born next year age into those programs anyway. Let's be ambitious about declaring a modern Declaration of Independence ahead of our 250th anniversary next year. That's the charge that we have ahead of us as a conservative movement. Not to be victims in our own right, not to complain about the other side because we won. Now is our moment to actually define who we are and what we actually stand for. What do we actually believe? What does it mean to be an American? That we believe in the principles of meritocracy that made this country great. That we believe in hard work. That we believe in work requirements attached to government aid if you're ever actually going to get it at all as a path to independence from the government rather than greater dependence on it. And I think the two things we're going to deliver at the state level is, number one, the foundation of a world-class education that I believe is the birthright of every American in this country, and the path to financial independence that allows us to sunset that original sin that began with FDR and was exacerbated by Lyndon B. Johnson and the Great Society, to actually sunset that entitlement state to create a new dawn in our country, a new American dream, where every child knows they are equipped both financially and educationally to be able to stand on their own 2 feet with pride to achieve the maximum of their own God-given potential, not by suckling at the teat of their federal government, but empowered by the states that allow them to thrive and live that American dream that I have lived, that so many of you in this room have lived, and that we will bequeath to that next generation of my kids and to yours. And we in Ohio will do our part to set that national example so that, 10 years from now, when we're sending manned rockets to Mars, when we're powering our electric grid with the energy of the future, when we're curing previously incurable diseases with cures discovered in our own home state of Ohio, you know what our young people are going to say then? Only in Ohio, and a model for the rest of the country. Thank you, guys. God bless you and your families, and we'll be back. Thank you. Thank you.